analyzing the outfits in Poor Things. Yorgos Lanthimos is known for his unusual films, and 2023's Poor Things is no exception. Based on the 1992 novel of the same name, Poor Things focuses on Bella Baxter, a woman who is brought back to life via a brain transplant and proceeds to embark on a journey of self-discovery. The film received polarized responses from the public, with some praising its depiction of female sexuality, while others called it exploitative and harmful. I personally don't feel like joining in on that discourse. I just want to talk about the costuming, which was universally cited as a standout, with costume designer Holly Waddington receiving several awards for her work. The costumes are just as bizarre and beautiful as the film itself, and serve as a way of developing the characters and fleshing out their surreal world. Although Poor Things is set during the tail end of the Victorian era, the clothing is extremely experimental, combining motifs that were popular in a variety of time periods in order to create its distinctive steampunk-adjacent aesthetic. Today we're going to be taking a look at the outfits worn by the film's protagonist, Bella Baxter, from their real-life inspirations, to their historical accuracy, to their subtle symbolism. Because this is YouTube, I won't be able to talk about or show everything that goes on in the film due to its explicit nature, but there will still be some spoilers. You've been warned. Now let's get into it. The film begins with a young English woman, then known as Victoria Blessington, plummeting to her death off of a bridge. Her body is then discovered and commandeered by Dr. Godwin Baxter, who uses it to carry out a diabolical experiment. He removes the brain of Victoria's unborn child, transfers it into her own head, then brings her back to life, and she is subsequently reborn and raised as Bella Baxter. Although the exact reasons behind Victoria's decision are a mystery for most of the film, we come to discover that she felt trapped by her circumstances and saw death as her only viable means of escape. This early ensemble is used to distinguish the differences between Victoria and Bella from the get-go. The color itself is representative of how blue Victoria feels, while the deep jewel tone creates a stark contrast to the soft pastels that Bella wears for the rest of the film. The color mirrors Victoria's surroundings like the sky and sea, creating a monochromatic visual that literally shows how she's been swallowed up by the world, leaving her with no sense of passion or hope. She's literally and metaphorically drowning. Although the film is set in London during the 1880s, the outfits are rooted in fashion trends of the 1890s, with this ensemble being the most faithful to that time period. As the most historically accurate outfit in the film, Victoria is instantly positioned as someone who has spent her life abiding by society's expectations of her, even when it was detrimental to her own well-being. As such, she's a stand-in for many Victorian-era women, representing the complicated emotions and issues they experienced behind closed doors. According to costume designer Holly Waddington, who actually wore an homage to this dress at the Oscars, the director didn't want to make a full-blown period drama, and he pushed her to reimagine trends of the era to better fit the direction of the fantastical story. This required a good deal of research on her end, which involved studying antique fashion plates, reading historical accounts, and compiling visual references from all over the world. As someone who spent days researching just the final costumes, I can't imagine what Waddington was going through when she was actually creating them. But at least it's the 21st century and not the 1800s anymore. Thanks to Opera, a handy-dandy web browser, all of the information I needed to make this video was right at my fingertips. And with all of their great features, it's easier to work smarter, not harder. I honestly have no idea how I lived all of these years without it. If you're anything like me and can get easily sidetracked, Opera's Aria feature is a lifesaver, quickly answering any questions you have right when you have them. No problem is too big or too small for Aria, so gone are the days where you'd have to go on an entire side quest just to figure out when the Victorian era began and ended. During the research process for any video, I wind up with dozens of articles to sift through, which can get pretty overwhelming. So I love that Opera's Tab Island feature helps me stay organized. Since you can quickly group the tab islands by topic, it's way easier to find what you're looking for. Plus, you don't need to have a million windows open at once. My computer has never run more smoothly. It's like it got a new brain or something. With a built-in VPN, Opera makes sure that no matter what you're doing online, all of your information stays private. And with their free ad blocker, getting rid of pesky ads is only a click away. No extensions needed. If you're searching for a better browsing experience, try out Opera today by clicking the link in my description. Now let's get back to the video. Garments of the late 19th century were incredibly ornate, featuring lace, beading, embroidery, and feathers, but Waddington got rid of this traditional ornamentation and opted for something more avant-garde instead. There was a big focus on texture, not only experimenting with a wide array of modern fabrics, but also manipulating them to create more depth. This blue dress has elaborate folds running down its sleeves, which are intended to resemble the shoulder plates on a suit of armor, which alludes to Victoria's violent husband's position as a military general. The stiff collar almost appears to be choking her, showing how she's being held back by the constraints of the era. Women have been wearing some form of supportive undergarments for centuries, and we continue to do so today. But during the Victorian era, the corset was all the rage. Although its use was widespread across different social classes, there was a good deal of controversy surrounding corsets. In the mid-1800s, the dress reform movement emerged, which saw early feminists calling for women to free themselves of the restricted styles that were popular at the time and wear more sensible clothing instead. Some dress reformists claimed that the use of corsets contributed to women's health issues, an idea that many doctors of the time period latched onto, saying that it was especially harmful to wear them during pregnancy. Although this led to a mild case of moral panic, with many men denouncing the use of corsets, women continued to wear them throughout the 19th century, as they not only helped them achieve the popular silhouette of the time period, but were also a necessity as they provided additional support for their heavy skirts. The fad of tight lacing, which drew the most criticism from doctors and dress reformists, wasn't as common a practice as anti-corset wearers proclaimed. Corsets effectively served the same purpose as bras do today, and many women of the time period even stated that they actually found them to be quite comfortable. So no, people weren't randomly fainting in the streets because they couldn't breathe. Victoria is shown to be wearing a maternity corset, which were developed in the wake of the aforementioned corset controversy and were advertised as a necessity for expectant mothers, with some companies even claiming that they were prescribed by physicians. And even after women's fashion relaxed in the 1920s, maternity corsets remained in use to some extent until the 1940s. This is the first and last time that we see the character in any form of corsetry, highlighting how she will be far less restricted in her new life. The film switches to black and white when Bella is in her early development stages, with this lack of color being representative of her negative emotions and naivete. Although her physical, mental, and emotional capabilities are that of a toddler, we're still able to understand that she's unhappy, as she's being kept from her greatest desires under the guise of protection and propriety. Although this colorless sequence makes up a good portion of the film, the costume designer wasn't made aware of the decision until after the entire wardrobe had been created, which is why Bella's outfits lack the high contrast details that are typical of a black and white project. But luckily, the emphasis on texture worked in their favor, creating a visually dynamic look in spite of the muted colors. These outfits were made up of pink, fleshy tones, which director Yorgos Lanthimos compared to a rotten apple. Waddington was fascinated by this idea, using the color of apples in different states of decay, combined with human flesh and bodily organs, to dictate the direction of the rest of Bella's wardrobe. This resulted in an array of yellows, browns, greens, pinks, and reds, with these organic colors serving as a reference to Bella's own circumstances. She's Godwin's creation, someone who otherwise would have been decomposing in the ground. Bella is infantilized by everyone in the house, with Godwin acting as her father and Mrs. Prim as her nanny, and Mrs. Prim is actually the one who picks out Bella's clothing every day. In this sense, Bella is like a living doll, being treated as a mere object, a pretty fascination, instead of an actual person. Tying into the idea that she lacks any agency at this point, her attire is dominated by motifs associated with children, like quilted fabrics, ruffles, drawers, seersucker, and nightgowns. On occasion, we see Bella pair these items with bustles or giant-sleeved blouses, popular elements of Victorian attire, but she's missing all of the pieces that would make it proper for the time period. The idea behind this is that Mrs. Prim initially puts her in full dress, but as the day carries on, Bella discards any part of the outfit, like the skirt or heels, that get in the way of playtime. Waddington drew inspiration for this from her own children, saying, quote, "I notice that they often tend to shed clothing as the day progresses without any self-consciousness. They end up with pants on their head and bits of clothing missing." Godwin dotes on Bella just as any father would, no longer showing the impartiality needed of a scientist, and as such allows her to dress and act as she pleases. The only exception is when they all venture outside for a picnic, Bella's first time out of the house. And this is also one of the only instances when Godwin firmly tells her no. After she sets out on her grand adventure, Godwin attempts to replace her with another experiment. But having been hurt once before, he is much colder towards Felicity, something made apparent not only by his distant behavior, but also his firm insistence that she always be dressed in appropriate attire in order to ensure optimal conditions. He doesn't coddle her like he did Bella because he doesn't see her as his child. The bustle Bella occasionally wears is inspired by an actual trend from the Victorian era, which saw the shape of women's skirts being exaggerated towards the rear, although by the 1890s it was already on its way out. The silhouette has made numerous appearances in the film industry, but the bustle cage itself doesn't usually make its way on screen as it's exclusively worn underneath one's clothes. This unfamiliarity with the garment results in modern viewers finding the entire look strange, tying not only into the bizarre situation, but also Bella's unconventional behavior. This bustle, which Waddington compared to a lobster tail, is more modern in its construction, being directly inspired by Montclair puffer jackets, furthering this sense of peculiarity. Compared to the bustles of the 1870s and 1880s, the skirts of the 1890s were fairly simple. In response to this, sleeves became more elaborate, resulting in the popularity of the leg of mutton style. While these sleeves started off rather small, they grew larger and larger over the course of the decade, before eventually falling out of fashion at the turn of the 20th century. Apart from the shape of Bella's skirts, these gigantic sleeves are what makes the film's 1890s inspirations obvious, and the production didn't take as many creative liberties with their size as you'd think, with Waddington following actual antique sewing patterns when constructing them. These leg of mutton sleeves are worn throughout the film and were symbolic of the character's defiance of the patriarchy by making her physically take up more space. Although the Victorian era is a popular setting in film and TV, for some reason the 1890s always gets the short end of the stick, with fashions of that time period rarely making appearances. But if you're like me and get a kick out of these giant sleeves, here are a few other films that feature trends from that era. 1946's The Harvey Girls, 1947's An Ideal Husband, 1969's Hello Dolly, and 2015's Crimson Peak. Although Emma Stone is known for her red locks, the actress is actually a natural blonde, and as if wanting to distance her from any of the characters she'd played in the past, they gave her a drastically different look for the film. Stone said the color was actually a mistake on her part, as she was originally meant to be a dark brunette, but Lanthimos loved the contrast between the jet black hair and her very pale skin, drawing comparisons to an Egon Schiele painting. Schiele's work actually influenced the film in other ways as well, including the color palette and raw sexual imagery. Bella's black hair personally reminds me of Frankenstein's monster, a story that Poor Things is effectively a subversion of. Throughout the Victorian era, respectable women were expected to wear their hair up in public, and although there are a good deal of photos of women with their hair loose, it was mainly for artistic purposes. Haircuts weren't exactly commonplace at the time, so women's hair would grow to incredible lengths. And the Seven Sutherland sisters even made a living touring the country with their hair as a major selling point. Because seeing a woman's hair undone was so rare, it was considered a very intimate, romantic, and even sexual act. With that in mind, we can interpret Bella's habit of wearing her hair loose not only as a reference to her burgeoning sexuality, but also another instance of her indifference towards social norms. For modern viewers, her long hair also draws comparisons to hairstyles of the 1970s, mirroring Bella's free spirit and her more modern mindset. When Bella tells Godwin of her plans to leave home, she wears a blouse and skirt, looking far more put together than she does the rest of the time. The outfit represents Bella's growing pains and her desire to be independent, and by donning this ensemble, it forces Godwin to see her as a young woman, not a child. As she's packing to leave, we see an array of clothes make their way into her suitcase, foreshadowing the outlandish outfits to come. Upon arriving in Lisbon, Bella's first real adventure, the movie explodes with color, with both she and the audience seeing the world in all of its glory. Thanks to Mrs. Prim, she's initially dressed in more proper attire, wearing a blue traveling suit with a white ruffled bodice. While it's similar in silhouette and color to the outfit worn when she was still Victoria Blessington, there's more sweetness and softness to it, with Waddington comparing it visually to sugared almonds. Even in this more formal outfit, she isn't wearing a corset, which was a purposeful choice on the production's end, as they felt Bella would never humor an article of clothing that was so inhibiting, with Waddington saying, quote, While corsets are beautiful and I appreciate them, they force the body into a particular shape. They're entirely imbued with ideas of control, dictating a way of looking, walking, and maintaining a posture that's predetermined by somebody else. Bella is unbridled and uncontainable. She's free. She can't be molded and hasn't been shaped by societal norms. Having her in a corset would have felt wrong. Again, a properly fitted corset wouldn't have felt like torture, but I digress. With the film focusing on Bella's liberation, they needed to have her look like a modern woman, one who wouldn't wear the undergarments of the time period because she thought they were pointless. One character who does wear a corset is Duncan Wedderburn, not only symbolizing his egotistical nature, but also demonstrating how some men during the Victorian era did sport corsets to appear slimmer. After engaging in some furious jumping, Bella is left unattended while Duncan naps, and this boredom prompts her to venture out into the city on her own. As she isn't aware of proper etiquette and no longer has Mrs. Prim's help, she wears what she's most comfortable in, her underwear, which are a pair of 1930s tap pants, so named because they were often worn by tap dancers. Bella isn't wearing this as a fashion statement, it's that she simply hasn't been taught to feel shame for her clothing choices, making it clear that this is more of an impulsive decision than a rebellious one. This state of half-dress is playful, and while it's reminiscent of what she wore back at Godwin's house, the satin tap pants don't feel quite as juvenile as the lace drawers she'd previously sported. These tap pants aren't the only 20th century influences on her ensemble either, with Bella's boots being from the 1960s, although they are reminiscent of shoe styles from the 1800s. With their side panels, Bella's sunglasses look futuristic, but they were in fact antiques from the late 19th century. During this time period, tinted glasses weren't a fashionable accessory, but instead worn out of necessity by those who were sensitive to light. The specific style in the film were known as railway spectacles, and were often worn by passengers taking open rail transport who were subjected to smoke, wind, and sunlight. These sunglasses serve as a reminder that Bella is unfamiliar with the ways of the world, and is therefore more susceptible to being harmed. This combination of time periods feels like another callback to Frankenstein's monster, who was similarly stitched together out of different parts. At dinner, when Duncan wishes to present her to his high society friends, Bella is dressed in a gold gown. Although the two initially bonded over their lack of interest in what is polites, it's at this moment that we understand that Duncan only cares about that sort of thing when it benefits him. Otherwise, he finds Bella's eccentricities embarrassing. With its shiny fabric, giant bows, and excessive trim, the dress is far more gaudy and garish than Bella's usual attire. And considering Duncan's foppish personality, we can infer that this was something he purchased in the belief that it would make Bella, and therefore himself, appear more well-to-do. The two argue for the first time, with Bella physically striking him. And although she seems to go along with Duncan's petulant demands when they finally return to their table, she throws it back at him by responding inappropriately with the phrases he told her to limit herself to. This is a sort of warning on her end, telling him that she will not allow him to boss her around as he pleases, which is mirrored in the colors she's sporting, with the black and yellow being reminiscent of a bee, a creature that attacks when provoked. She sets out on her own once again while wearing a pink jacket and skirt, a white top and tap pants, and a large black hat. The outfit is Bella's attempt at dressing herself properly, although we can see that she hasn't quite nailed it yet, hence the sheerness of her skirt. This mishmash of pieces was intended to resemble how children play dress-up with their parents' clothes, a reminder of Bella's developing mental state. She isn't quite ready to be a fancy lady, as evidenced by her passing out drunk in the middle of the day and getting into a physical altercation on the dance floor, something mirrored by the increasing casualness of her outfit, first losing the hat, then the jacket, then finally the skirt. This dishevelment creates a more sensual look, making it appear as though Bella has just emerged from a session of furious jumping, and we see more men act lasciviously towards her as a result. This outfit's pink hues are symbolic of Bella's blossoming sexuality, femininity, and immaturity, while also referencing the colors of certain female body parts. Although the skirt mimics the bustle shape with a series of ruffles, its transparent quality makes it appear far more modern, while also highlighting Bella's unpredictable dance moves. Throughout the film, we see Bella re-wear different articles of clothing, and this outfit is no exception, helping ground the otherwise surreal film in reality. When she's tricked by Duncan and brought onto a ship so he can keep a closer eye on her, she's wearing just the white tap pants and top, which is a great example of how cyclical fashion is, as it looks like something I'd see on Pinterest today. When she sets off to explore these new surroundings, Bella throws on a pea green puff-sleeve dressing gown, which she wears a handful of other times in the film, either as a cover-up or more experimentally as a faux evening dress. Compared to the heavy, quilted dressing gowns she wore at Godwin's house, this feels a lot more grown up, highlighting her mental and sexual evolution. It mimics the popular silhouette of the 1890s, just with modern styling and fabrics, and it actually reminds me a good deal of the robe in Crimson Peak, which is just to die for. Bella's emotional state is quite complicated when she first gets on the boat, as she's growing increasingly irritated by Duncan's whining, but is simultaneously excited for a new adventure. This dissonance is reflected in her attire, which is colorful to the point it's practically an eyesore, and the amount of cloth feels stifling compared to what she'd been wearing previously in Lisbon. The outfit includes a handful of trends from the 1890s that we'd yet to see, symbolizing how Bella is at risk of losing her independence as Duncan attempts to pressure her into conforming. She wears a yellow ruffled capelet, which had transformed from a functional piece of outerwear to something more fashionable in the 1890s, as well as a blue plastron, a collar with cloth details that fell to the chest to make the simple bodices of the time just a bit more interesting. Up until this point, Bella's journey of self-discovery had been focused on the physical, but this is when she begins to broaden her horizons intellectually, not only taking up reading, but also befriending people who have no intention of exploiting her. Having found a group of friends that she feels she can be herself around, she reverts to her usual Bella style of bodices and tap pants. With her mind maturing exponentially, something Duncan actually complains about, this blue outfit feels more thought out than some of her others, and it's personally my favorite of all of her looks. In the hopes of learning more about the human condition, Bella visits Alexandria with Harry, an event that drastically alters her perception of humanity and herself. While the all-white outfit is initially symbolic of Bella's innocence, it comes to stand for her privilege, visually aligning her with everyone else on the ship who has chosen to ignore the poor people who literally reside beneath them. The extravagance and formality of the dress is a reflection of the social class Bella actually belongs to, and how she isn't as much of a rebel as we've been led to believe. From head to toe, she looks perfectly refined and put together, juxtaposing the inner turmoil she feels upon discovering the horrors that she'd been oblivious to. Despite the atrocities that have happened to her, she isn't starving in the streets, and she acknowledges how unfair that is, sowing the seeds for her journey as the film continues. No longer an ignorant child, Bella's clothing becomes more proper, mirroring this newfound sense of awareness, and we see her continue to wear full dress of her own volition. She's not focused on just having fun anymore. There are bigger fish to fry. When she and Duncan are unceremoniously thrown from the ship and left to fend for themselves in Paris, Bella dons a yellow coat, peach blouse, and gray skirt. The yellow shade is consistent with her pre-existing color palette, and against all of the grays and blues in the background, it shows how her sense of optimism continues to prevail in spite of hardship, not to mention how captivating people find her to be. The coat is the most eye-catching part of the ensemble, and while it might first draw comparisons to the bright raincoats worn by children, as seen in It or Coraline, upon closer inspection there's more to it than meets the eye. Made out of latex, the coat was meant to resemble a Victorian-era condom, a fitting choice considering Bella plans to seek employment at a brothel. It also calls back to the latex lab coats worn by Godwin and Mrs. Prim during their experiments, as if implying that while that's their messy business, this is going to be Bella's. Bella begins wearing heavy makeup consisting of dark eyeshadows, red lips, and bold blush, which at the time weren't worn by members of polite society, hinting at her newfound profession. The outfits worn during these scenes aren't true to what was actually worn at Victorian-era brothels, which typically included corsets, stockings, and boots, items that still have a sexual connotation today. Waddington wanted to actively work against these sexy stereotypes by leaning towards more organic and human visuals. During Bella's time at the brothel, she wears a good deal of skin tones accented by hints of green or yellow, with these flesh tones being used to imply nudity, even in the rare moments when she's clothed. Her yellows, which were more buttery early on in the film, become acidic, showing how she's become slightly bitter in the face of all this debauchery. She's not all sunshine and egg tarts anymore. Due to the nature of her work, she wears very little apart from the occasional dressing gown or tap pant. The styling of these looks, and those of other working women, were inspired by the artwork of Otto Dix and George Gross, who frequently depicted those who were considered social outcasts. There's a deleted scene while Bella is working at the brothel, which shows her objecting to their callous doctor and questioning why the men who frequent the establishment aren't required to do these invasive tests as well. The outfit is nothing new, but I felt like I had to mention the scene as it's the final push Bella needs to study medicine, and I have no idea why they didn't include it since it makes her motivations even stronger.
I am not sorry. If I know the world, I can improve it.
This is not how a doctor behaves to a patient. A doctor is kind, with a commitment to the betterment of society.
As she begins dabbling in socialism and expressing interest in becoming a doctor, her outfits take on a more masculine and academic tone, reflecting where she's at in her development. Whether it's to blend in with the boys or to be taken more seriously, whilst attending a human anatomy lecture, Bella wears a tailored coat, starched shirt, and necktie. However, we can still see her penchant for nonconformity, as she isn't wearing a skirt to make her attire proper. With the knee-high socks and short hem, there's something a bit sensual about the outfit, but it still comes across as more serious than her pastel tap pants and sheer blouses, highlighting how much Bella has matured intellectually, emotionally, and sexually. The darker color palette is also symbolic of how Bella isn't as naive as she once was, now understanding on many levels how depraved people can be. When she returns to London to visit the dying Godwin, she wears the same black coat, but this time with a matching floor-length skirt. While people had taken to wearing darker colors as a sign of mourning for centuries, during the Victorian era it developed into another restrictive set of rules for people to abide by. As such, we can interpret Bella's all-black ensemble as a form of Victorian mourning attire, an expression of the sorrow she feels over Godwin's inevitable death, as well as her grief over the circumstances revolving her creation. Going to the bridge that she had once leapt from, we can see some similarities between the two outfits in regard to their color and silhouette, allowing the audience to infer that Bella wishes to uncover more about her past in order to better understand herself, setting up what happens later. When she asks Max to marry her, Bella is once again in her condom coat, along with a gingham skirt and cream turtleneck sweater. Apart from the coat, the outfit is fairly muted in color, highlighting Bella's new personality, which is more reserved, although she does still have her fair share of quirks, and said quirkiness is reflected in her wedding ensemble. Instead of a more traditional veil hanging from the back of her head, Bella's is wrapped around her face in another reference to Otto Dix. The sleeves are some of the largest we've seen thus far, having rope-like details which remind me of the corded petticoats of the mid-19th century, although Waddington has cited French fashion designer Madeleine Vionnet as her inspiration behind the look. During the Victorian era, white wedding dresses were seen as an opportunity for conspicuous consumption, allowing the bride's family to show off their wealth in front of their peers. Although it wouldn't have been customary in the 1880s, Bella's white dress reads as traditional to modern audiences, allowing us to interpret that to some degree, Bella is going through with the marriage to try to please Godwin, so when a more tempting offer comes waltzing through the door, she doesn't hesitate to take it. When she moves back into the Blessington manor, Bella wears her former self's clothing and experiences similarly depressing emotions. Described as ugly by Waddington herself, the burnt orange color is completely unlike anything we've seen Bella wear so far, showing how this imprisonment has left her feeling disoriented. The gold military motifs allude to Alfie's tyrannical behavior, while the purple plastron is representative of how he intends to force her to become the quintessential Victorian woman. I find this to be a wonderful full circle moment, with Victoria being able to get revenge on her husband through Bella, all while she's wearing the stifling clothes that represented Victoria's unhappy existence. This look would later serve as the inspiration for Emma Stone's Louis Vuitton dress at the BAFTAs, which ironically, people hated. When switching out her wicked husband's brain for that of a goat, Bella dons a lab coat, one that has her signature puff sleeves, and it's a great way of showing that she's taken control of her life. She's no longer the creation, she's the creator. At the end of the film, when Bella has taken over the Baxter home and is studying for her physician's exam, she achieves her final form. She's wearing the same cream turtleneck from earlier, along with a brown split skirt. The outfit is minimalistic and relaxed, lacking the ruffles, pastels, and randomness of her prior outfits, showing how she's become more mature and grounded as time has passed. She's no longer a child being deceived by others, but an adult who has fully come into her own. Although this outfit looks like something you could find today, both items are taken directly from the time period, with the sweater being a recreation of one that's exhibited at the Met. In the 1890s, a bicycle craze swept American and European society, and women joined in on the physical activity en masse. However, the long skirts and fitted bodices of the time period made cycling challenging, resulting in women donning knickerbockers, a pair of trousers. But the masculine clothing item was incredibly controversial, with many men opposing their use. In response, female cyclists took to wearing split skirts, which are effectively the precursor to modern-day culottes. Although they were called split skirts, in actuality they were pants. They just had a loose enough fit that it gave the illusion of wearing a skirt. Both her sweater and split skirt are representative of how things were becoming less restrictive for women at the turn of the 20th century, not only being able to wear more casual and comfortable clothing, but also participating in activities that had once been exclusively for men. With Bella studying to be a doctor, an occupation women had previously been shunned from, this outfit embodies her goals for the future, as well as her newfound agency. It's truly a happy ending. With bloomers, ruffles, puff sleeves, neckties, and boots all trending these last few years, Bella Baxter is as much a fashion icon today as she would have been 100 years ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if she becomes Pinterest's latest it girl. Which of Bella Baxter's outfits were your favorite? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!